Okay, so recently I made a video where I played Pokémon Black and White for the first time. And despite the video being about those games and Generation 5 in general, there was one tiny passing comment I made near the very beginning that a lot of you picked out and posted comments about. Luckily the 6th and 7th generation games were still readily available and easy to purchase, and then I was able to experience the 4th generation through the remakes that were released just a short while back. Right there. I said that I experienced Generation 4 through the remakes, and that is absolutely the truth. I've never played the original Nintendo DS titles. I've only ever experienced the Sinnoh region via Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl. And a lot of you took exception to that. A lot of you felt very sorry for me, or even outraged at such blasphemy, and implored me to go and sit in a corner, think about what I'd done, and play the originals while I'm there. So that's exactly what I set out to do. Play the originals. I didn't actually sit in a corner, sorry. Before I did though, I went to a few of my fellow Pokemon playing buddies and asked them one simple question. Should I play Diamond and Pearl, or should I play Platinum? And overwhelmingly, those friends of mine said, play Pokémon Platinum. Okie dokie then. So how did playing Pokémon Platinum feel to a player who's only ever experienced the Sinnoh region through Brilliant Diamond Shining Pearl? Let's take a little walk. I've mentioned before that I do have a certain fondness for pixel sprite Pokemon games. The sharpness, the saturation. Call it nostalgia, call it whatever you want. It all gives the world a warm, inviting aesthetic. Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl don't look horrid. They are poppy and colourful, but Platinum does look a lot better in my view. There's a certain something that just doesn't quite translate when you pull a pixel sprite game up to 3D. And it's hard to put my finger on. It's almost like it loses some of its rawness and pungency. There can be such a thing as polishing something too much, to the point where it becomes a little sterile. I hope that makes sense in some way. I always say that Generation 4 is my least favourite generation. Not that I actively dislike it, it's just the region I like the least out of all of them. And a lot of that is about the region itself. Sinnoh is a big region that no matter what I do, I can't seem to find my bearings in. And I think playing through Pokémon Platinum has finally illuminated me as to why that is. It's a region that throws you around all over the place. Sinnoh's games give you a fair bit of freedom, but they also have you backtracking on yourself a lot. And that's something that's quite disorienting to me. Usually when I'm picturing a Pokémon region, I can visualize where every town and city is relative to everywhere else, because I can visualize my playthrough and which direction I went from each location to the next. With Sinnoh, I can't seem to do that, because my experience with it is so erratic, and the routes are so numerous, that it's hard for me to immediately picture where Pastoria City is in relation to Jubilife City, for example, because I've bounced around in so many directions between them that I've lost sight of where exactly I've ended up in the grand scheme of things. It feels like the map could have benefited from being a bit smaller, a bit more condensed. Because that's another thing. You go through a fair bit of back and forth between locations before you can unlock HMs like Fly that make things a lot quicker and easier. I mean, HMs are a whole situation in themselves in Pokémon Platinum. In BDSP we had hidden moves replacing them, which made things a lot simpler. But wow, during Platinum I needed so many team switch outs to fulfill all of the HM requirements. I understand the staple HMs like Surf and Strength, but did Defog really need to be a thing? I actually tried my best to scuff by without it, but I had to give in at one point and teach it to Noctowl to get myself up to Snowpoint City. I feel like some sort of Defog key item would have been a better way to go in this case. The Sinnoh region feels a bit messy. There's a lot crammed into it, which should be a good thing, but a lot of the routes feel so arduous that it's not the best experience for me. Sinnoh's routes without repels, I don't even want to flirt with that thought. A big reason why some people told me to play Platinum over Diamond and Pearl is some of the stuff that was fixed in the defining version of this generation. A big one that got mentioned was the speed of certain things within the game. At one point I was directed to a video of a Blissey's HP bar taking like a whole minute to run down to 0. And to be honest, I still found Platinum to be very slow. I do own a physical version of Platinum for my collection, don't ask me how much that set me back to obtain. But I'm glad to have done this playthrough through an emulator because it meant I could speed things up a little bit. This could just be an older game thing in general to be honest, but the battles still felt kinda slow, character movement is a bit sluggish too, Even the general pacing of the game was a button mashing crawl in a lot of places, particularly at the beginning of the game. I know Scarlet and Violet have the whole hour-long tutorial section at the start, and that feels tedious, but this felt worse to me. Everything was at a snail's pace. It was a different time, on different hardware, so I don't want to harp on it too much, but it was just something I noticed. And if this was significantly faster than the original Diamond and Pearl games, my gosh, I don't think I'll be playing my copies of those on my DS anytime soon. BDSP focuses on the story of the original Diamond and Pearl games, so it was cool to be able to experience the tweaks and expansions that came in Pokémon Platinum. I noticed that Cynthia has a bigger role in Platinum. She shows up far more often to provide bits and pieces of information and guidance to push the story onwards. From what I remember, in BDSP, she played a much more minimal role. She was the final boss more than anything else. That's sort of how I've primarily perceived her up until playing Platinum version. She's a much more involved character in this version, which is good. I think the region's champion should have a decently frequent appearance rate through a Pokemon game. Team Galactic's whole narrative and motivations are expanded a fair amount in Pokémon Platinum, compared to BDSP. I wasn't huge on Team Galactic in BDSP purely because they seemed a bit bland. A bit too generic as villains. But adding Giratina and the Distortion World to the picture added some much needed depth, and made their arc as a villain team much more compelling. And as a whole, I could tell Team Galactic were just more present in Platinum. There were more interactions and more battles. I definitely felt better acquainted with them this go around. They felt much more substantial as part of my journey. The Distortion World is really cool. Took me a while to find my way around the puzzle because I kept losing my way and going around in circles. Skill issue on my part, no doubt. But it was an immense experience. I genuinely felt the tension and drama of it all. I always thought the whole Cyrus saga ending at the Spear Pillar was a bit meh, but being dragged into the Distortion World felt like a much more complete and significant climax to everything. Looker is a fun character in Platinum. I've seen him in many other mainline titles, but Platinum was the first game he appeared in, so it was nice to tick that box off. This is the OG Looker. He's not consequential to the story, he just nudges the player in the right direction every now and again, but I like recurring characters like this. There's a familiarity there that gives you this tiny dopamine hit when you run across them. I feel like after playing Pokémon Platinum, I honestly understand the perspective of people who aren't fans of the Johto region. Sinnoh isn't bad, but a lot of the region does look kinda sameish, and I feel like a lot of people say that about Johto as well. Johto is my favourite region, but there's a lot of nostalgia that goes into that, and I think Pokémon Platinum falls under a very similar umbrella. I feel like if you played this game growing up, you're probably going to have such a fondness for it and that place in time in general, that it's nearly impossible to view the region with a fresh, objective pair of eyes. And if you didn't play either of these regions growing up, you kinda just see them for what they are at face value, which isn't nearly as impressive as what they represented for the franchise at the time. Both the Johto games and the Sinnoh games were big leaps for Pokémon. They both represented a sizable progression in video games and video game technology. So coming to these games for the first time all these years later, you're surrounded by people hyping them up to no end and wondering why you just don't see the same whimsy in these games that they do. That's the reason why. But if Platinum was the game that you secretly played under the covers when it was well past your bedtime, like Crystal was for me, those memories are going to carry this game massively for you. I think Platinum is a pretty good game overall, and I think it's a game better off played at a leisurely pace as well, because perhaps the vastness and zigzaggy nature of Sinnoh I mentioned earlier is better appreciated when you're not zipping through the experience in just a few days. BDSP is much more streamlined, the XP share is there too. Maybe that's done the region a bit of a disservice in a way, because in those games you can fly through the game in a short space of time even easier than being able to play Platinum at 3 times speed. Perhaps Sinnoh is meant to be savoured over a much longer time frame, as handheld games used to be back 15-20 years ago. I remember catching up with friends at school on a Monday and telling them that I'd got 1 new gym badge over the weekend, or maybe just caught a few new Pokemon, or finally evolved my Togepi. Nowadays we're playing whole games from start to finish over a weekend. I'm basically trying to pick holes in my own complaints here, because there are contextual explanations for them. So all things said and done, now I've played both BDSP and Platinum, which do I prefer? You know what, it's a harder decision than I thought it'd be. Because honestly, from how people have been talking up the original Nintendo DS experience of Sinnoh, I kind of expected to be blown away by the obvious, transcendent brilliance of Pokémon Platinum. But my final assessment is this. Platinum is the ultimate experience for Generation 4. If you're ready and willing to plant yourself in, and absorb everything within the character and culture and lore of the Sinnoh region, then put the time aside to have a steady and attentive playthrough of Pokémon Platinum. That's where the value is. If you just want a casual snapshot overview and experience of Sinnoh and its story, so you understand the references your friends make to it, Brilliant Diamond Shining Pearl will scratch that itch just fine. Platinum is the better game though, by a mile. There's no shock revelations coming from this video. But I want to hear from anyone who is a real die-hard Gen 4 fan. How do you feel about Pokémon Platinum and Brilliant Diamond Shining Pearl? Because as I said, I draw a lot of parallels between Gen 4 fans and Gen 2 fans like myself. But it seems like a lot more changed from Diamond and Pearl to Platinum than from Gold and Silver to Crystal. And a lot of those changes not being present in BDSP, I imagine has got to be really disappointing. Let me know in the comments though, interested to hear what you think. While you're down there, please do drop a like on the video to help the channel completely for free. Subscribe for more Pokemon content. I'm actually really enjoying using this downtime, this dry spell between Pokemon games and game release hype, to go back and reflect on some of the older games I don't have as much experience with. So also let me know if there's any particular game you'd like me to talk about next. Thanks very much for watching, take it easy, and I'll catch you all in the next one.